Let me add my voice to those of you celebrating EMU's 25th anniversary this week in Dallas. I'm so disappointed that I wasn't able to be with you because of my work and travel schedule. But I do want to recognize that this is a great celebration for EMEU, and I want to thank Len Rogers for putting EMEU back on its feet and giving it a new and exciting future. When we led EMEU back in the 1990s, we had no idea, I think, that we were at the forefront of an important shift in evangelical thinking about the Middle East. So this month, what I did is went back and tried to build a bibliography that almost provides us with a chronology of the way in which evangelical thinking has changed over these years. So you have already received, I believe, the bibliography here at the conference, so I would encourage you to take it out, take it in hand, and let's look at it together. Think back to the 1970s and the 1980s. In those decades, evangelical discourse regarding the Middle East was controlled almost entirely by dispensationalists. Writers such as John Walvoord at Dallas, Hal Lindsey, who originally came from Dallas, remember his book, The Late Great Planet Earth? These writers saw the foundation of the State of Israel in 1948 and the Six-Day War in 1967 as fulfillments of biblical prophecy. So it wasn't until like the 1980s, the late 1980s, early 1990s, that evangelical scholars began to engage and critique that position, and that is precisely the era in which EMU began its work. So take a look, if you would, at this bibliography, and I want you to notice two things. First of all, notice when publications began to emerge, and secondly, we'll take a look at what publishers were willing to write on this subject. Now, EMU was in its early formative period in the late 1980s, but we really did only get underway around 1990. But notice in 1992, Colin Chapman is, I think, the first who actually stepped out and spoke to us on this issue with his very important early book, Whose Promised Land, which was re-released in 2002. So, but notice how the books have emerged. 1992, you see Colin Chapman, Peter Walker, my own contribution, Don Wagner, again Peter Walker. All of these names, again, are those people inside of EMU who were deciding that we needed to have another voice in this discourse. Don Wagner has been absolutely instrumental in pushing this discourse forward, and Colin Chapman needs to be commended for his remarkable courage in keeping this at work. Now, Colin Chapman today is retired in Cambridge, England, and he is still an important voice for us. I don't know if he's in Dallas, but if he is, he deserves our praise. The other important academic name on this list is Peter Walker, who in 1992 published his first book. But Peter at Oxford University in England, he is a name that we ought to note as we see this story unfold. I would also draw your attention to the book in 2000 by Johnston and Walker. This is called The Land of Promise. Now, why it's important is this. First, John Stott wrote the foreword for that book, and it was the first time that John Stott decided to speak openly about Christians in the Middle East and how evangelical thinking has been skewed. But above all, notice who published that book. It was published by InterVarsity Press. Now, that means that a mainstream evangelical publisher had decided to engage this subject, and they had not done that really previously. Here's an example. You can see my first publication on this in 1992. Notice that the publisher is Zondervan. Zondervan is a conservative evangelical publisher, but when this manuscript went to the publication board, there was an outrageous debate in Zondervan. Were they willing to break ranks with the dispensationalists and be criticized for publishing something that would criticize standard evangelical views? Zondervan made that decision, and as you will see, Zondervan continued to represent a critical position on this. The other book that I think is important for us to note as EMEU members is the 2002 publication of Walter Brueggemann. Brueggemann's book, The Bible and the Land, is really a study in Old Testament theology, but it's probably the most substantial study to date of how land operates in biblical theology in the Old Testament. The other book that I would draw your attention to is in 2004, and that belongs to Tim Weber. Tim Weber wrote a book called On the Road to Armageddon, How Evangelicals Became Israel's Best Friend. Tim Weber is a historian, and what Tim is doing is he's charting how it is that evangelicals fell into a Zionist camp, and therefore it's the only history that we possess that lets us know where we have come and certainly where we are headed. The other name that I would point out to you is in 2005, it is Stephen Sizer. Steve lives south of London. He is an Anglican clergyman, but he has become really EMEU's specialist on Christian Zionism. He has a couple of publications, and each of them are important. The last one that I would note is 2006, Jimmy Carter. Now, of course, Jimmy Carter is one of our former presidents, but he is also an evangelical, and here for the first time what we have is an evangelical Baptist who has been in prominent government leadership, now for the first time coming out publicly and saying Americans and Christians need to have a different view on the Middle East. So from 1992 all the way up until, well, this year, we again and again have seen evangelical scholars engaging and critiquing how evangelicals think about this, and EMEU has been at the very center of this conversation. Turn the page. The other thing I wanted to point out to you is this. There has been a sea change also in how we view the Middle East as constructive for understanding the New Testament and its theology. And here I decided to go ahead and embarrass Ken Bailey, who I know is with you as our guest speaker, but Ken has contributed in ways that can barely be measured in this subject. Ken has single-handedly reclaimed the words Middle East for biblical exegesis. Now, his contributions have been enormous, but beginning in 1976, he began to publish books which said the following: it's possible for us, it's necessary for us to go back into the culture of the ancient Middle East and reclaim biblical themes which will help us understand our texts today. So you can see he contributed a couple early books on the parables of Jesus, and then look at what happens in 2005. The Cross and the 2008. Jesus through Middle Eastern Eyes, Cultural Studies in the Gospels. Notice the publisher. It is InterVarsity Press that is now carrying Ken Bailey's name, and InterVarsity is one of those mainstream evangelical publishers. But notice what Ken is doing. He's saying Middle Eastern culture is important for us. The Church of the Middle East is important to us for us to understand our scriptures better today. So therefore, what we have are two things happening. That political, theological framework which dispensationalism gave to us has now been critiqued. Now Ken Bailey is saying to us, there is also another way to look at the Middle East and reap some of the treasures which are there for interpreting the New Testament. Third thing. Here's the third thing I noticed. If you look on page 2, halfway down, you'll notice now also Christians who are Middle Easterners have also engaged this subject. And there are some very important contributions that you and I need to note. In 1984, Ilya Shakur wrote Blood Brothers, and I have probably never seen a book that has changed the hearts and minds of Western Christians more quickly than Blood Brothers, and it continues, of course, to be in print. But notice important names. From 1984, Shakur, Naim Atik, who was not an evangelical, but nevertheless his book, Justice and Only Justice, was the first Palestinian theologian to begin to ask questions theologically about the political state of Israel. But Audi Rantizi, Mitri Rahib in Bethlehem certainly is important. Alex Awad, who is writing his own personal narrative. All of these are Middle Eastern contributors who I think in this period of time, 25 years, recognized that the West was open to hearing them. They gained their voice in the very same period in which EMEU was practicing its own conference building. The fourth thing that I've noticed when I worked on the bibliography is this, is that for the first time in the last 5 years, Jewish voices have decided to engage this subject as well. And if you'll turn the page to page 3, you'll notice that there are two important voices that I think ought to be a part of our conversation. Mark Ellis at Baylor University has published 2 books, one in 2004 and one in 2009, and Mark Ellis, working within a Jewish theological framework, has raised the very same questions EMEU has raised in its tenure. And then most recently, Mark Braverman's book, Fatal Embrace, Christian Jews and the Search for Peace in the Holy Land, is another essential read for each of us. So the point is that we have a chronology of publications, and these publications almost work as a historical sort of markers throughout the last 25 years. EMEU has been a vital player in organizing those conversations. But there is more. We have also begun to use the web, the internet, in ways which we didn't imagine in the late 1980s. John Hubers is to be credited with grabbing the website christianzionism.org. When we discovered that that was available, I think all of us fell right out of our chairs. We were shocked. So therefore, if someone does a web search for Christian Zionism, they will land on this site. And many of us, Don Wagner, Steve Sizer, myself, we have all placed articles in there, and it has really been an effective site for us. The other website that I would mention for you is middleeastfellowship.org. This is Phil Elkins and John Burge, who have put together an important sort of resource for news about the Middle East, but it's also a go-to site for students who want to learn more. Next, evangelicals have engaged this subject just in the last couple of years using film, professional film that we have never seen before. And I would draw three to your attention. First, there is John Pilger's very important film from 2006, Palestine is Still the Issue. If you haven't seen it, you need to get a hold of that. I use it in classrooms, and it is very effective. But just this year, two vital films have already come out, and I'm sure that you know about both of them. With God on Our Side by Porter Speakman and Little Town of Bethlehem by Jim Hannon. Both of these films have circulated widely in the United States and I believe in Europe, and they are making a major difference. Here at Wheaton College, we have shown both of those films, and we have drawn enormous audiences. We have packed out the place. The last thing that I would draw to your attention is student immersion programs, because we have recognized in EMEU that if we are going to make a difference in the thinking of the church, it is the younger generation that is going to lead the charge. And we can show them films, we can assign them books, but the most important thing we can do is to put them on a plane and take them to the Middle East. And we have discovered that when students are in an immersion program in the Middle East, living in a Palestinian Christian's home, or just simply living in a place like Bethlehem or Damascus even, it's possible for them to see something they have never seen before, and hearts are definitely changed. There are three of these that I would note for you, and if you're related to an academic institution, we need to be directing students there. Holy Land Trust has the Middle East Fellowship. That is an immersion program in which you can send in students for 1, 2, or 3 months. They will take care of housing. They're completely integrated into the life of Bethlehem. The second one is the CCCU program. That's a coalition of Christian colleges in America. They have an immersion program in Cairo, which is, they think it's one of their best programs. And it's called the Best Semester Program Cairo. Just Google that on the web and you'll find all of the details. You spend a semester in Cairo, you travel extensively in the Middle East, and all of those academic units are transferred back to us, back to your home college. And then lastly, I guess the most edgy thing that is going now, there are always those students, of course, who want to go just over the horizon on this issue, and that is Tent of All Nations. It is Daher's Vineyard, and of course here you have this very controversial farm which is on the edge of Bethlehem, and it is right at the front lines, really, of settlement activity and residential Palestinian life. And so therefore, what you have is a place where students can actually go and work at the farm. They live in tents. It's a pretty remarkable experience. Well, all of this together creates a composite picture. It means that for 25 years, evangelicals have been thinking about this in a new way. There is momentum. And EMEU has been a part of that momentum. And honestly, there have been few people who have been more significant than Len Rogers and people like Tom Getman and Steve Sizer and Don Wagner who have actually put this together for us. So this list, I think, is a part of our celebration. These efforts are a part of our legacy. And these are voices which have been championed by EMEU, and now we are in the wider conversation. Many of us are called upon to speak in radio shows. Many of us are called to engage this in magazines. And those of us who have had a small role in it have been grateful to do so. I am really proud that I've been able to make a small contribution, and with Len Rogers' leadership, I know that EMEU has a great future. So have a great meeting today in Dallas. I wish I was with you, and God bless you in your work.